Hello and welcome. You're listening and possibly watching the Influence Change at Work show. I'm your host, Heather Stagel, coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia on Blog Talk Radio and also now a video on probably YouTube and Facebook. I'm trying something new today, recording the show on video, and it'll also be uploaded to the podcast. So this show is one of the many ways I help equip individuals and teams to influence change at Enclaria. You can find more episodes like this one, plus additional resources to help you influence change at work at enclaria.com. Today, my guest is Katy Saulpaugh, who joins us from Washington, D.C. And today we will be discussing the integration of change management and knowledge management. Katy is a change practitioner who has implemented culture and technology change strategies for private, public, and nonprofit clients in the U.S. and in Europe. She has developed solutions to drive adoption for knowledge management projects using online communications, instruction design, and employee engagement approaches. She also specializes in agile coaching and facilitation and has enabled clients to become more agile at the team and organizational level. Outside of her professional work as practice lead at Enterprise Knowledge LLC, Katy is a frequent speaker and writer in the Agile, Change, and Knowledge Management communities. She is a founding member of the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Association of Change Management Professionals as well. Katy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's just start with really basics. So when we're talking about knowledge management, what does that even mean?
That's a good question. And there's a lot of controversy and disagreement around it. But at its most basic level, knowledge management is about harnessing an organization's knowledge. So getting knowledge from people's heads, that's called tacit knowledge, to a place where it can actually be used and reused. So that's known as explicit knowledge. And the way you get there is a couple different things, technology, and then on the people side as well.
So what are some of the projects that you've been involved in? What types of projects?
Sure. So on the technology side, the goal is always going to be improving the findability of content. And most people associate KM projects with things like intranets or SharePoint or even document management systems. That's sort of the stereotype, and it certainly does involve a lot of work. And so an example might be we work with the National Park Service, and we've built a common learning portal for them. So all of the park rangers, we say at the end of the trail, are able to access learning materials, whether it's video, blogs, and other types of content. And so actually building that platform, in this case in a WordPress technology, is some of the work that we do. But knowledge management is also the people and process side of things. So for an example, I'm currently working with an airline client to help them build a community of practice. And a community of practice is a place where some knowledge it's really difficult to just document it. You really have to share it amongst peers. And so it ends up being more of a community building exercise, which I think is something that will be pretty familiar to change practitioners. It's something that a lot of us do kind of naturally anyway, but it's also something you see a lot in knowledge management practices.
Okay, so is the point basically not even so much knowledge management, but knowledge sharing and just maintaining the expertise within the organization and helping it so that it doesn't just stay in someone's head and then they leave, or just stay in somebody's head and somebody else needs it, or,
Yeah, and that's the problem that knowledge management is trying to solve. You have, on one hand, a lot of people of the baby boomer generation who are on the verge of retirement. They have a ton of knowledge and expertise that hopefully they're able to share. And then on the other side of things, you have people who maybe are not staying with a company for 20 years like they used to. And so they develop knowledge even in a short amount of time. How do they share that with their peers and mentor others? So this is why there's a technology component. There's always going to be some kind of technology component. But in practice, it ends up being a little bit more of knowledge sharing and reuse. So having people actually practice using the knowledge that's been generated.
Okay. So what are some of the common challenges to implementing knowledge management programs?
So I could go through this for hours, but I think the most common that I see is the first one is knowledge hoarding. And this is the classic KM resistance that you'll see. A lot of times people, especially ones who've been in a company for a long time, they've built their reputation on being an expert. And they feel like if they share some of the knowledge that they have, that they're going to actually lose that expert status. Or potentially they'll be let go and someone else will come in and do the work. So that's one. And I think in that sense, it's working with those people individually and helping them understand the value of sharing their knowledge to their peers. The other one that I see, which I think is more of an organizational issue, is over-reliance on technology. Implementing SharePoint is not going to solve all of your knowledge management problems. No. I'm just using that as an example because it's usually the most, love it or hate it kind of platform. Having people actually using the system in the way it's intended and in a way that benefits them is the key. So you can't just hand people technology and say, here, now share your knowledge. There's a little more to it than that involves, not just the training piece, but helping them actually design the platform in a way that's going to be more intuitive for them.
Okay. So that first challenge that you mentioned where people are sort of hoarding information for job security as one example, what are some of the ways that you help people through that? Because that's, I'm sure, feels like a loss to them or feels like, they're giving up some kind of security. So what do you do?
Yeah, there's a lot of different incentives that you can use either at an HR level, so people can implement mentorship programs. Using the communities of practice is a little bit less intimidating because it's peer learning versus your manager saying, you must document this knowledge. It's also more fun. So
nobody wants to be just writing down what they know, really.
Right. You just say you must document more to people is not necessarily selling it very well. So it's about really sharing the value that how it's going to make people's lives easier that they're actually working with and that they know and they trust. And in some cases, people will not completely get there, but at least having people do some work shadowing or something that's going to help them get to that place where they trust the people that they're sharing knowledge with is really important.
Yeah, I'm sure part of it is just feeling like, I'm the expert on this. So even if I tell them, they're still not going to be able to do it as well as I do. So, having that, I'm sure, is another thing that people want to hold on to.
Well, and what we see is that once people do start to share knowledge, that they actually enhance their expert status. They don't undermine it because people are coming to them. They realize this person can help. I'm trying to do this. I'm struggling with it. And then it actually helps them a bit more. But you have to get them to start experimenting with that to get to that place.
Right. I've seen that as well, where if you actually share the knowledge that you have, people see that you have it.
Right.
And then come to you with questions. So that's a good point.
Right. And we've even seen groups, one classic KM technique is what's called an expert finder. So giving people actual status in their organization can go a long way to making them feel pride in the knowledge that they've been able to develop.
Great. So, and we were already started in on this, but what are some of the change management approaches that you use to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, so one thing that I found kind of interesting is when you're dealing with that resistance, really helping people be more involved in the solution. And this is kind of where the Agile background that I have comes in a bit. If you're designing a knowledge portal, whether it's document management system, intranet, or whatever else, having people who are actually end users come in and help you understand what problems that they're facing in sharing knowledge and building the portal around that. So fitting the technology to the people instead of the other way around. And as an added bonus, asking people for their input and their help is a great way to get buy-in, obviously, but you actually end up with a tool that people can understand why it's being used. So that's a communications piece in itself. What I have not seen work very well is just, getting training on something that has not been tailored to people's needs.
Here's how you use it.
Yeah. And you can tailor training, and that helps a little bit more, but it's better if you can actually involve the people who are actually end users even earlier in that phase. Yeah,
involve them in the design of it and actually fix some of their problems in the process. That's right. A great way to get people to buy into any project that you're working on.
Right. And that's the technology piece. Now the people and process piece gets into some, behavioral norms and practices that a lot of times are more difficult to combat. I mentioned communities of practice and expert finders. Those things are only good if people show up and use them, right? So a lot of times it's going to be a matter of finding an internal sponsor or someone who's really passionate about it, not having it be something that an external consultant does. So typically what I will do as an external consultant is coach somebody into that role as the leader of a community of practice or the leader of a expert finder functionality. And that has a lot more sway than me coming in and doing it. Even if I'm an expert in change management or communities of practice, they want somebody who knows them, who's one of them.
Right. Somebody who, they can't just say, well, you don't know because.
Yeah.
So you mentioned bringing in some kind of a sponsor or a leader of these communities of practice. How do you find those individuals? Are they already leaders in the organization, or is it someone else that you usually tap for that role?
So I think there's two different things. There's somebody who would be the sponsor of a community of practice who would actually, if it has a budget, would manage that budget, and would also provide some, permission for people to miss their work. That's usually the way you have to present it in order to attend these informal learning sessions. On the other hand, you have somebody who's more like almost like a coordinator, who is somebody who actually helps to facilitate the meetings or manage any sort of listservs or technologies that they have, who's really more of a doer. The sponsor is someone who isn't necessarily going to come to those meetings, but they're there if people are questioning, why is my guy going to this meeting for 2 hours, once a month on a Wednesday. They can have the answer in this way to be able to say, hey, here's the value, and basically owning the business case for why it exists. If you don't have that business case, it ends up being, there's just limits to its success. You'll have people who can't come because they're not allowed.
Right.
You won't necessarily get the training or other types of external speakers or other resources that might really make it a valuable thing for the organization.
Great. So can you maybe dig into one of a case study that you've been working on lately and give us some more details about how this works?
Sure. So why don't we talk about one that I haven't mentioned yet, which is technology. It actually kind of combines both.
Okay.
But for the World Bank, we are creating a knowledge management system that's actually mobile-based, and it's actually being used for a project called Clean India. It's called Swash Bharat. And it's basically the largest water and sanitation project in India right now, which is pretty exciting and impactful. But basically the idea is that the technology enables people who are in the field to share what's working, what isn't working, for actually helping people practice these water and sanitation practices. So it's not something that you have people in headquarters saying, here's what you should do, and here's the system that will tell you. It's we're going to connect you to each other and actually, have you share what's working in a way that will be more meaningful to you, because it's people who really understand you. And so what we've had to do is think about what these users actually need. So one thing that came up is internet service is spotty in many places in the field in India. So we had to create offline capabilities. There's also a number of different languages that people would like to communicate in. So we have, it's like 3 or 4 different languages that we had to support using the tool. And these are things that we got from talking to people in the field after running workshops of what they actually need to use. So it combines the technology best practices around adoption. I mean, we couldn't just build a desktop app and expect that they would use it, And then on the other hand, finding out what people need, who they want to listen to, who the experts are, and connecting them in that way.
Okay, so is this sort of like an internal social media system in a sense?
Yeah, so it has a lot of those same features in the look and feel. It's really a knowledge repository. So it's people can share all sorts of things, video clips, documents, and that sort of thing. And it shows up in a feed that's easy for you to use on your mobile device. Now, social media is there's sort of like a Venn diagram overlap, right, of social media platforms and knowledge management platforms. Certainly, this has a little bit more of the formal learning than you'd see on a traditional corporate KM platform or corporate social media platform, kind of like Yammer. So it's less of a social get to know each other tool and more of a practical knowledge management tool. But yeah, I mean, there are certainly some similarities in the look and feel.
It seems like just the trend with social media, it would be interesting to take advantage of the principles of how, getting people to turn on the mobile device and look at it and scroll through to find what they need.
And I think that's why tools like Slack have been so successful, because they have the capability to do all those things in one place in a very easy way. But the issue is with organizations, a lot of times that they have so many different competing technologies that it's really difficult to get people to use one for a particular purpose. So you'd have to have, Slack replace everything or, try to work with what you have.
Yeah.
But that's another, important piece of it as well, right? Is looking at the overall technology portfolio and from the perspective of the user. Is it a hassle for them to even access this tool? If it is, they're not going to use it.
Right. Great. So I'm curious if you've ever included any kind of gamification in a system like that, where they get points for adding their knowledge, or, I was just thinking that maybe that would be an application there.
I've seen that more so with communities of practice, but I think certainly, it's something that you could easily implement for knowledge transfer. I think that for portals where people are having to publish things, the gamification works a little bit better. And I know that we're exploring potentially using that with the Park Service. We're not quite there yet. For the communities of practice, a lot of times the community itself is a reward. So there's less gamification that's needed. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly, in the same space and has a lot of benefits.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So let's flip this a little bit, because we've talked about how do you apply change management to knowledge management, but I'm curious about the flip side of that, which is how does knowledge management potentially help change management programs?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this, and I think that one overlap that I see all the time is change networks and communities of practice. So those groups are already kind of self-selected people who are very excited about what they're doing. So at the airline client that I mentioned, we actually used a community of practice, which was totally unrelated. It was basically, they call themselves data geeks. they're business intelligence folks.
Yeah.
And we were trying to implement agile transformation. So they said, well, we just want to start experimenting. We're just going to start trying these things, and then we'll share with the organization what we've learned. And we can kind of say like what works and what doesn't. And so they ended up being the early adopters, but also people who were well respected and liked throughout the organization. That's for like the community organizing, overcoming adoption part of things. But in addition to that, I mean, it's obviously important to understand what has happened in previous change efforts, what's been successful and hasn't. And this is kind of getting into lessons learned databases, which are another common tactic. Those need to be there in order for you to leverage them as change practitioners implementing something currently. But if they don't exist, it's certainly worth talking to people who've been part of other change efforts and find out what worked and what didn't. And that could be part of any sort of assessment process that, or stakeholder analysis that's in place. And I think that's something that if you have good change management, or if you have good knowledge management, then change management will be easier in some respects.
Great. So I'm hearing that when you have a change management project, even if it's not related to knowledge management, that applying communities of practice, which is one of the tools of knowledge management, is a great way to find your early adopters and get them working on the change itself.
Yeah, so if let's say that you have a technology platform that you're implementing, you can create, instead of having a change network where people are basically PR folks, they can actually have a little bit of a different status, which is that they're practicing with the tool, they're sharing, what they learned, what works, what doesn't, and they're actually getting to test new features. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can involve a group like that, which is going to give them even more input into the process, but it's also going to make them feel like they're making a difference and that they're being listened to, which is really important.
Great. And then the second use that you mentioned was when you have change management, like having that knowledge repository where you're keeping the lessons learned from previous change management projects to make sure that you don't repeat the same mistakes, but also you remember what worked going forward. I imagine you need both of those pieces.
Right. And a tool that I like to borrow from the Agile world is using regular retrospective. So rather than waiting till the end of a, might be multi-year project, actually conducting check-ins as you go to see what's working and what isn't. And that's something that you can do in your current change project, but you could also, if you have other change projects going on in your organization, you can kind of share that information between the groups and see what's working and what isn't. Great.
So do you have any other nuggets of wisdom that you want to use to sort of tie a bow on this conversation?
I think it's important to note that knowledge management isn't something that needs to be a big bang change. You can start, even if you're an individual change practitioner, implementing some of these practices immediately, whether that's starting an informal learning group, even if you don't call it community of practice, or even if you don't call it center of excellence. You can start practicing some of these ideas. If there's somebody who you're working with who has a ton of knowledge, ask them questions. Get them to feel like they are an expert, because they are, right? And you don't know what's going to happen next in the project that their expertise might be helpful for. Knowledge management is, in some ways, a fairly academic discipline. It doesn't need to be. So you can take some really practical steps to get there.
Great. So where can listeners find you and learn more about the intersection of knowledge management and change management?
So I am a pretty active blogger. You can find my blogs on enterpriseknowledge.com or on Twitter, and my handle is @Katy Saulpaugh. I also want to add a plug. If anyone's in New York next week, I'm speaking at a business agility conference there, and you can find more about that at businessagility2017.com. Great.
Well, Katy, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for listening and watching the Influence Change at Work show. If you'd like to find more resources to help you influence change in your organization, including individual coaching, team workshops, and upcoming training events, please visit inclaria.com. And while you're there, sign up for the monthly newsletter and receive a free change readiness assessment to help you see if your change initiative is set up for success. Until next time, best wishes on your change initiative. Bye.